everyone, and welcome to Unified Purpose, the podcast where we share inspiring tales of compassion, resilience, and community spirit. I'm your host, Shannon, Penji's Partnership Coordinator, and I'm joined here today with a very special guest, Due Quach from Calm Clarity. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So, could you please start by telling us a little bit about yourself and Calm Clarity and what inspired the creation and what your mission is and, maybe what your day-to-day kind of looks like.
That's a lot of questions.
Well, that's usually the biggest part. So we want everyone to be familiar with you as possible. So go right ahead.
Sounds good. So my organization, Calm Clarity, I found it back in 2013. And our mission is to use neuroscience to develop the leadership capacity of human beings to co-create a world where every person thrives. And that's a different way of defining leadership than most other organizations or universities or business schools do, because oftentimes leadership is just getting things done. But we see it as, do you actually have the capacity to make the world better? And there are people coming out of top schools, like I did, Harvard, Wharton, who don't have that capacity, who don't know how to do that. Mm-hmm. And for me, a big part of it is really understanding how your brain works. Can you bring yourself into a state of alignment and wholeness, where you're centered, where you're creative and agile, where you're grounded, you can see the bigger picture perspective? Or do you get swept up by stress and triggers into a state of reactivity, where you kind of on autopilot just lash out or move too quickly with Band-Aid solutions instead of seeing the bigger picture and understanding the underlying root causes of things? And to the extent that there are more leaders who are in a state of alignment and wholeness, it changes the world around them. And they support the people that they lead to come into a state of alignment and wholeness as well. And that by itself transforms organizations into places where there's psychological safety, creativity, innovation. And in the nonprofit sector, it provides spaces for very deep healing to actually unfold. And too often, even in spaces where people want to do good, they do get caught up in cycles of reactivity and stress, and sometimes toxic stress. There's a lot of secondary traumatic stress and burnout that lead nonprofit organizations to be less efficient, less effective, to actually undermine their own mission, right?
Yeah.
And so the important thing for all of us is to understand how our minds work. When are we our best friends? When do we allow ourselves to become more effective? And when do we get in our own way? When are we our own worst enemies, right? And when people aren't in a state of alignment and wholeness, oftentimes they're in a state of insufficiency, right? And insecurity, and they give into thoughts of scarcity, or they create more scarcity in the way they think about the world, right? And so I often think of what we do as helping people build a strong inner foundation. So if you think about the foundation of a building, if it starts to buckle under stress, weight, and pressure, then the entire building can collapse, right?
Yeah.
If you think about a human being and the amount of pressure and stress they're under, have they cultivated a mind, an inner foundation that enables them to thrive through turbulence, through adversity, through challenges like we're seeing today? And, during the pandemic, a lot of people realize they don't have a strong enough inner foundation, right? And they began to collapse, right? Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. And so it's really important to recognize what allows us to have this strong inner foundation so we can move through crises and actually become better people. And what, if we don't have an inner foundation, do the crises destroy us, right? And I realized in my own journey, I grew up as a refugee in inner city Philadelphia. My family settled in Logan. Then we moved to West Oak Lane and ran a takeout restaurant where gangs came in, fought each other, shot each other. There were drive-by shootings into the store. And, you could fall into a state of despair. And many people, the negativity was just unmanageable, right? It became overwhelming and people lost hope. And a lot of people got caught up into the mass incarceration system, right? And as I watched this unfold, I didn't really understand what was going on. I was too young, but it was so sad and so tragic that I decided to make a promise that I would want to one day come back and try to address it in some way that I could. And that drove me to go through every open door that was available to me, or to kick as many doors open as possible, right? And that's how I got myself into Harvard College. But Harvard, you don't just catapult from one end of the socioeconomic spectrum to the other and have it make sense, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't have social support. I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have any role models. Harvard was a sink or swim place at that time, and didn't give me any resources or programs to help me transition, right? And the inner foundation that I had at that time wasn't strong enough to help me make that transition either. My coping skills when I grew up in the inner city look tough, like just push through. Don't ask for help because you don't want to be weak, right?
Yeah.
And when I took those patterns to Harvard, I struggled and exacerbated my own suffering, you could say, my own distress, right?
Yeah.
And it took a while before I gave myself permission to seek help. And by that point, I had all these symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. My mind was literally falling apart, right? I had panic attacks, uncontrollable crying spells, flashbacks through the night of violent incidents I'd witnessed. And I just was on the verge of hurting myself. And so I went and got help, and luckily was put in touch with a psychiatrist who finally explained to me that all the traumas I had gone through as a baby when my family escaped Vietnam and I nearly died over and over, to the childhood I had growing up watching and witnessing violence, right? Was pretty different from your typical Harvard student, right? And it was very rare for people like me to end up at Harvard. But because of what I had been through, my brain was different. And my brain didn't know how to adjust to this new situation, right? And so he suggested, given that the research on trauma was still very early stage, there might not be a cure for what I was going through. And he suggested taking drugs, like a cocktail drugs at different doses to find something that worked and to begin therapy. Now, that was all helpful, but it wasn't enough. And I grew up without insurance. It was before CHIP, right? And after graduation, I was probably going to lose my insurance. And so I thought to myself, I need to really figure this out before I graduate. So I started digging into the neuroscience based on what he taught me about my brain, and started to experiment with mind hacking techniques, because I realized my brain was different from my peers. I didn't have the resources and the enrichment that they had, but I could still try to build the type of neural networks that would allow me to excel at Harvard the way they were excelling, right? And so I tried different approaches, and eventually I managed my symptoms better, and I graduated with honors. And I continued to use neuroscience and mind hacking techniques to excel and thrive in very elite, very exclusive careers like management consulting. I got into the Wharton School of Business, and I went into private equity, growth capital investments, right? And helped run private equity deals for a company in Southeast Asia. And at some point, I paid off all my debt. And I was like, I can finally give myself permission to become a social entrepreneur and come back to Philadelphia to address the problems I faced growing up. But what exactly would I do? How do I move the needle? Because there's so many organizations, so much is happening, but being poor still sucks, And like, how do I really change things? And so I took time off and I went on a journey. I bought a one-way ticket to Dharamsala to learn how to meditate and to really understand, what the Mind and Life Institute dialogues, what they were discovering about how meditation changes the brain. And I wanted to experience that for myself. The Dalai Lama has started talking to all these neuroscientists, right? And it was sort of this beautiful exchange where neuroscientists could bring these monks into the lab and do like fMRI images of their brain. And I was like, oh, how do I get something like that to happen from my brain?
Where science meets spirituality, it's such a beautiful thing, because it's not something that happens that often.
Yeah, and it was so mind-blowing and fascinating that I bought myself this one-way ticket, got to Dharamsala, and I was like, okay, I guess I go into these meditation retreats and experience this for myself. And what I realized was meditation was such this powerful mind hacking technique. It was driving neuroplasticity in a way that I'd never experienced before, especially if you do like an intensive immersive retreat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it was like 10 days of, for the most part, noble silence, right? And you just practice outside of your daily habits. Like you're in this completely different environment, and you just focus on looking at your thoughts and rewiring your patterns. And it was amazing, right? And by the end of this experience, I realized, there's such a need to explain how the mind works, but without religious stories, without religious beliefs that have not been validated or proven, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is there a way, now that we have all this empirical evidence, to present a user manual for steering brain development, right, to help people boost the functioning of their brains, leveraging what was coming out through this field called contemplative neuroscience? And so since then, I came back to Philadelphia, and I looked around, and at that time, the school district was like imploding. There was some ridiculous gap in the budget, right? I think they lost I can't remember if it was like 500 million or 300 million shortfall that they dealt with by laying off non-essential staff like guidance counselors, school nurses.
Non-essential, totally not essential at all.
Vice principals and stuff like that. And I was like, what? It was hard enough when I was coming up through the system. It must feel even more impossible for people coming up now. So what is the way I can make a difference? And I realized what I could share was how I navigated a broken system without letting it break me. Mm-hmm. So I started packaging what I call mind hacking into a leadership and life skills program, and somehow convinced people to allow me to test it on them. And so Masterman was one of the first schools that welcomed me in and said, do your pilot here and we'll help you collect data. And then we partnered with the Knitters Center to share it with students in West Philadelphia across different schools during a summer program they had. And then we tested it with first generation college students at Cabrini University, which I think no longer exists. But what we found again and again was, once we shared this user manual for steering brain development, the students all of a sudden transformed. They didn't get stuck on the things that stress them out, right? They had the capacity to step back, look at their patterns, and be more resilient, see a bigger picture, to basically connect with what I call your higher self, and allow your higher self to guide you through. And so the basic idea is that all of us have what scientists call a default mode network. It's this critical part of your brain that self-activates almost all the time. And that's why they call it the default mode. And then they studied, what does it actually do? And they realized it creates a mental model of the world, and then helps you navigate that world by making predictions. Like, if you eat this, will you be full enough? If you eat that, will you feel sick? Where do you want to have dinner? What college do you want to go to? Just every decision of your life, there's a voice in your head that tries to help you decide if that's the right decision for you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so this default mode network changes based on your pattern of brain activation. And we basically spelled out 3 patterns. When you're hijacked by fear, when you're in self-preservation mode and your threat system has taken over your default mode network, I simply call that brain 1.0. So there's no blaming or shaming. Like, it's just easier to see, like, threat system is fully formed when you're born. You can go into brain 1.0 very easily. And if you've had a lot of trauma, you had a lot of setbacks, you've been bullied, like, you can get stuck looking at your entire worldview in brain 1.0, right? A space of fear, contraction, you stay small to stay safe, right? You get closed to new experiences, right? You see everything that can go wrong and you rarely see what can go right. And that's, so many people get stuck there.
Yeah.
That's brain 1.0. And it doesn't feel good. So a lot of people then use their dopamine system to make bad feelings go away. And they get fixated on doing things that will make them happy. So brain 2.0, the dopamine system taking over your default mode network, it drives to pursuit of happiness as a chase, but it actually almost always eliminates the ability to be happy. Because
Yes.
when you get what you want, there's a short-term satisfaction, then it goes away, you feel empty, then you have to keep chasing. And the more time you spend in brain 2.0, the more anxiety you feel, right? You have this anticipation, but then it's never enough. You're never enough. You're never good enough, right? And people become perfectionistic and they push, and they're never satisfied. And so you can have people like Michael Phelps break all the world records, but in brain 2.0 collapse with alcohol addiction and realizing he has to rebuild himself, right? So how do you rebuild your inner foundation if you don't have something that allows you to shift out of brain 1.0 and brain 2.0, right? That's really what we call brain 3.0. It's your centers for executive functioning and emotional intelligence. And these structures don't fully form until your mid-20s. So brain 1.0 is fully formed when you're born. Your dopamine system accelerates and matures in adolescence. Makes you take risks, makes you care about popular, makes you all or nothing. But then brain 3.0 is not really available until after 25. Even then, you don't really use it because it's not stronger than brain 1.0 and 2.0. So your default's already in 1.0 or 2.0, right?
Yeah.
And so, but if you show students how to build brain 3.0 earlier on, and there's 4 key systems for brain 3.0 to build. It's your attention system, your ability to direct your attention, focus, to see when your default mode network hijacks your attention and bring 1.0 and 2.0 and bring it back, right? There's your resilience system, which is basically monitoring how escalated your sympathetic nervous system is. And when it's escalated, it's directing blood flow away from brain 3.0. So it actually takes away your ability to access brain 3.0. Right? So you have to take slow, deep breaths. You have to go for a run, do whatever you can to bring oxygen and blood flow back to brain 3.0. That's what your resilience system is about. Can you regenerate your battery, right? Can you take care of yourself, build a stronger battery? And brain 3.0 is easily drained, right? So you have to constantly regenerate it. Then there's your meta awareness system. Are you able to step back from your default mode network and see the stories that it builds and realize, like, you have a distorted mental model of reality, like, you can't trust that mental model. Like, it might have been formed when you were 3, 4, 5 years old, and what it's saying makes no sense if you verbalize it. But it can destroy you from inside if you believe it and do what it tells you, right? So a lot of people have a mental model world that they're not good enough, that they're not lovable, or whatever it is. You have to question it. And then the last one is your connection system. And this is important because people who have experienced what I call, like, disorganized attachment or insecure attachment when they were younger, because they grew up in a circumstance where their caregiver, their parents didn't make them feel safe and secure, didn't really resonate with them, couldn't really read their needs and provide for their needs, then you go through life unable to build secure emotional attachment and relationships, right? You always, like, getting close to people or becoming intimate feels like a threat to you. It can escalate your sympathetic nervous system, right? And so we have to learn how to tend and befriend. So this is a core part of the connection system, and experience the benefits of tending and befriending. So a long time ago, when scientists started studying stress, they studied men, and the men would freeze, flee, fight. And they're like, okay. And a few men did something different, but they were outliers. And then finally, they studied women in the 1990s, and they saw women take care of each other, reach out for or give social support. They're like, what?
That's crazy. Whoa.
And then they realized this was a whole different mechanism that they called tending and befriending. And they realized in hindsight, some men did do that, but they were dismissed.
They were the outliers because that's not normal or whatever. Yeah.
And so, but when women tended and befriended, they handled whatever was causing stress better. Their bodies didn't have as much inflammation or toxic stress. And then they're like, wow, it's actually making you more resilient and helping you buffer the damaging effects of crises or adversity, right? And so when you learn how to connect instead of withdraw, it changes the way you respond to ordeals. And this is how we start to collaborate to solve problems. We tend and befriend each other. However, if we give in to the impulses, the urges to pull back, to contract, to see each other as threats, then we withdraw and isolate, and we become even more despondent, right? A lot of people fall into depression, and it's by coming together that we actually solve whatever's happening in the community. But right now, so many folks give in to the threat system, and they can't actually come together and collaborate.
Yeah.
And so by building these 4 systems, we cultivate this capacity to co-create a world where we all can thrive. And too often what happens now when you observe is that these systems just aren't strong enough in leaders, right, in community activists, that we're able to overcome whatever's pushing us into Brain 1.0 and 2.0.
Yeah.
And to change the world, we have to all come into what I call Brain 3.0. And when we're in 3.0, I call it like our inner sage. So I give different personas for the default mode network. Like in Brain 1.0, for me, that inner voice is like an inner Godzilla, right? Like it.
Godzilla's good though, isn't he?
Yeah, but he lashes out, trail of destruction, and then disappears into the ocean to be left alone.
You're right. True.
And then eventually Godzilla might come into Brain 3.0, right? So but the first couple movies were not that.
You're right. The original movies are just him destroying places.
Yeah. And then Brain 2.0, for me, that inner voice, and this might be before your time, but there was a great movie with Michael J. Fox called Teen Wolf.
Teen Wolf?
Teen Wolf is a comedy. And in this, he finds out hereditarily he's going to become a teen wolf whenever there's a full moon. But he's they become so popular because he becomes the best player on the basketball team or whatever it is. And the hottest girl in the school starts to like him. And so he gets everything he wants in Brain 2.0. It's like primal urges and everything. Mm-hmm. But then he realized he's pushed away his best friend and the girl that really cares about him. And then eventually he decides like to shift into Brain 3.0 so he can actually be happy, right? Yeah. But he has that phase where he just allows the teen wolf to sweep him into this other stage of being the most popular guy at school. And he's not happy doing so, right? But it's funny to watch.
Yeah, no, I feel like there's a lot of high school movies that are like that lesson is, Brain 3.0. I completely understand. I feel like that's almost the archetype of that kind of movie is like you get everything you want because of so-and-so thing happens, but then you realize that's not really what you want.
Yeah. And so, and that wisdom is there for a reason, right? And so when I think about like these voices, so I call my Brain 2.0 my inner teen wolf. And then in Brain 3.0, that voice feels like an inner sage because it's guiding me to be the best version of myself, to bring curiosity, compassion, wisdom, insights to the situation, to be more creative, to not be so judgmental, right? And to not rush to make decisions, but try to attune and bring presence and awareness to a situation. And so if we can all show up as our inner sages rather than our inner Godzilla or inner Teen Wolf, then we could really transform our communities.
Yeah, there's so much I have to comment on. So, one, I didn't grow up in Philly, but I've been in Philly for the last 8 years now. I went to Temple for college, and I've been here for a while, and I resonate with a lot of the issues that you see. I've seen Philadelphia's funding model. I was a political science major, and I know exactly what you're saying about the educational system. It is really sad how money is consistently taken away from it, especially with, you know, kids that almost need it the most, because education is inspiring, and the way in which we teach is, like, especially taking away those non-essential workers, which are genuinely so unbelievably helpful for, you know, like conscious thought, like making decisions that are for, you know, you, but also your community. There's so many things that could be taught at an early age that would, you know, dismantle what we kind of see as like this individualistic society in which, you know, the US kind of promotes. And I think that's, like, it's very interesting, because I do think like I guess philosophically the United States and many other countries like ours are very brain 1.0 2.0 centered. Like, we're not really trying to, you know, make people look in brain 3.0, because it's more easier to manipulate people in point 1.2.
Well, I would say, like, then there's this other aspect of the United States that's built on idealism, right?
Yes.
The people who wrote the Declaration of Independence, right? A lot of the founding fathers read Enlightenment philosophers like Locke, right? And Rousseau and others, and built a nation based on those principles that people can be self-governing in Brain 3.0.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have that other potion, you could say, in the water, right?
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's crazy that that's not what we focus on all the time.
yeah, and then we had this group of people called the Quakers who came with an egalitarian mindset on how do you connect with your own divinity, right? And it was radical, but they were like the first organization that let women lead as much as men do, you know? And that gave rise to the suffrage movement as well. And so we do have also mixed up in that history, Brain 3.0.
Yeah.
Right. And so, of all the countries to be in, this is definitely a strange melting pot of many of the people who came here for the ability to co-create a world where every person could thrive.
Yes.
Right. And some people came just to not pay taxes. Some people came to escape something else. Some people came because they were oppressed and they were put in chains. Right. So it is a mix what's in the water here. And I do believe, right, that fundamentally, if you talk to people about what type of world they want to live in, everyone would say, I would rather be in a world where everybody thrives,
Yeah.
which there's a pretty good chance I could end up being oppressed, right?
Yeah, it is. It's so interesting, because when you look at it, like, foundationally, the United States and, you know, developed countries almost, it they allow you almost to be able to get to brain 3.0, but it's not always like the centripetal focus of like what people are thriving to get to. Like, people are, I think, most often in that 2.0 of like that dopamine rush kind of thing, like doing these little things that like get you kind of happy, but only for a very short period of time. But like a lot of underdeveloped like countries are in that 1.0 2.0 because they have to be, like, they're in that mode, and it's such a weird space to be in, where, you know, you have that ability to get to that brain 3.0 because of your environment, and like what is like the privilege of being able to get to that kind of state. But it's not always focused on foundationally because it's not deemed as important necessarily.
Or people don't know how to get there.
Yeah.
Right. So there's just this lack of knowledge. Because I remember as I started to share this, so many people were like, I wish my mom and dad taught this to me.
Yeah.
But it's like, how would they know?
You don't know what you don't know.
Right. And what I thought was interesting when I was in India was looking at the history of how Buddhism came to America. And so in the 60s and 70s, all these hippies, right, were dissatisfied with the spirituality in the United States. None of them felt a connection with what was here. And it resonated with them to learn Buddhist practices. So many of them went to India, to Dharamsala, to Nepal, to Burma to find teachers, right? And then when they came back to the US, they formed like the Insight Meditation Society, and many people brought teachers to the United States. And then we had this blossoming of Korean Zen, Japanese Zen, like all these different centers and Theravada centers and all of this as well, because there was such a hunger for something different, right? And then it began this like fusion, or what I call fortune cookie meditation, right? Or make mindfulness, you could call it. Here, where people are just trying to make sense of these practices and translate them to life here in a developing country, right? And incorporate it into our capitalistic system and make money off
Really
of it. Right? And so, but what's fascinating is that a lot of the neuroscience is what allows us to kind of peel back the fluff or the misconceptions, the misunderstanding, or the marketing hype, right? Whatever's been over sensationalized, and look at fundamentally what is changing in the brain and is it beneficial, right? And it came down to these 4 systems being strengthened over time, which give us that inner foundation. So, and then when you look at other practices and other traditions, they do strengthen these 4 systems too, but it's not necessarily the reason why they do this, right? And so now we have the ability to reverse engineer what makes these systems stronger, and how do we create more exercises to strengthen your ability to direct your attention, your ability to recover, you know, during crisis, to bring more blood flow to Brain 3.0, your ability to be more aware of your stories and not get swept up by patterns that you've had since you were a child that no longer serve you, that it's time to outgrow, right? How do you rewire your autopilot to become a better version of you, right? And then your connection system. How do we not allow ourselves to give in to otherizing and dehumanizing each other?
Yeah,
How do we stay grounded and open our hearts and see each other's humanity? Right? That's missing right now. And what we see in this country, people get pulled into Brain 1.0 and 2.0, not because they don't value Brain 3.0, they don't know how to get there. So, and when I come and I talk to people and I give them my user manual, they go, oh, I haven't seen anyone say, I hate this user manual. I want to stay in Brain 1.0. Right? Or I want to stay in Brain 2.0. Like when we tested it with Wharton students, these Wharton people were like, oh my God, I spent so much of my life in Brain 2.0. I want to move into 3.0 more. You know, the same thing at Penn Law when we ran this. I recently ran it with one of the leading financial institutions here, and they said the same thing, right? I want to bring more Brain 3.0 into my life. But up until that point in time, without the user manual, they just had no idea they were running around in autopilot in 1.0 and 2.0. Then we gave it a name. We made it, we took away the blaming and shaming and just said, it's going to be normal whenever shit hits the fan, whenever there's a trigger for 1.0 or 2.0, this part of you is going to activate. Then how long does it take for you to choose to come into Brain 3.0? Because you have that capacity. It's just so easy when the blood is going to your arms and legs to flee or fight or freeze, whatever, to forget it. So it's just having to keep reminding yourself to come back into inner sage mode.
Yeah, it is something that I think that we both kind of addressed, is that you're not going to be able to get there if you don't know how to. And a lot of people are so used to, especially people with any kind of trauma or like just used to reacting or maybe not reacting at all as like a coping mechanism. A lot of people are just coping their whole lives and don't even realize it because it's just what they're used to doing. Like we're habitual creatures. And so to understand and make it a habit to be able to access Brain 3.0, as you put, is, you know, a really great foundational tool. But if we don't know about it, then we're kind of just in this space of what we know. And a lot of people will probably live their entire lives that way, and, you know, or reach this breaking point of like burnout or whatever you want to call it, where they need to make a change, but even sometimes then they don't know how to, and repeat that cycle.
I mean, I've been rewiring my brain now since 2012, right? And I still slip into 1.0 and 2.0
Yeah.
because it's part of life, and it takes a while to make each neural pathway in Brain 3.0 strong enough that it becomes your autopilot. So that's a lifelong journey. And until then, whatever's already in your autopilot just naturally activates in different situations, and giving yourself the grace to be like, okay, that's normal. Now I still need to choose Brain 3.0. And the sooner I choose, the sooner I shift, the stronger that pathway becomes, right? But it still takes a long time for it to become stronger than whatever was your default or has been your default. And so I just tell people, like, it's easy for us to point at other people and say they must be in Brain 1.0 and 2.0 because they don't value Brain 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, actually, you know, when they're given the choice, most people will choose Brain 3.0.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of how many people can we reach? How many people can we teach? How many people can we train? And that's been one of the challenges for us, is as we've tried to engage with the nonprofit communities, in particular here in Philadelphia. Even if we give away training for free, everyone is stretched so thin. Everyone is so mired in Brain 1.0 right now, especially during the pandemic. They just had no cognitive space to learn, to process, to build new neural pathways to come into Brain 3.0, even if they're the ones who could benefit most. Right. And so it's just learning to accept, like, people have to be at the right time in their lives where there's space for them to make change happen. And when they're just pulled so thin, there's just so much food insecurity, housing insecurity, job insecurity. There's just so much pulling them into Brain 1.0 and 2.0, and not enough resources to support them to create space in their lives to create change. There's not much we can do about it, right? And
It's
so
very similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs almost. It kind of sounds like that, of like when your basic needs are met, you're able to think about more of these other things and which would like reach your happiness.
yeah, well, I think it's just acknowledging that there are very rational reasons that people get pulled into 1.0 and 2.0.
Yes.
And it's not by choice most of the time. And so if they're given what they need, right, so that they don't have to feel like they like, we don't like uncertainty, we don't like instability. If we have what we need to feel safe and secure, right, if we have stability, then we can invest in enrichment, right, and grow new neural pathways. And what I wish, you know, the philanthropic community here would understand is that they often amplify scarcity. They often amplify the cycle that prevents nonprofits from investing in capacity building. So the nonprofits keep operating in Brain 1.0 and 2.0 instead of coming into Brain 3.0 where they can be transformative. And as long as the nonprofits operate in Brain 1.0 and 2.0, they continue to transmit that to the people they serve. So the people they serve, you know, all of our neural pathways, the brain patterns that we're operating in right now is contagious. So if someone shows up as a caseworker in Brain 1.0, you know, they can't really see the people they're trying to serve. They judge them, they project their stories on them. They can't really attune to them. all these caseworkers are burnt out. You know,
Yeah.
they have untreated secondary traumatic stress, which may lock them into 1.0 or 2.0. And until like everyone in the nonprofit has a way of building this inner foundation so they can bring their inner sages to the people they're trying to serve, they're often part of the problem as much as they want to be part of the solution.
Yeah. No, I think that is we do have to end here because we're a little over time, but I completely agree with that. The way in which you kind of help and the mindset that you have when you help is really, really like contributes a lot to how the population views themselves that you're helping. And it, I completely understand that like there's no placing blame on any of these people trying to help or the populations in which they serve, because everyone's burnt out in a different way for a different reason. And it is unfortunate that that's the mindset that they're in and that they don't have the capacity or don't feel they have the capacity to, you know, change that mindset. But at least, you know, there's a lot of times where people get into a space where they can finally accept that. And I hope that that's something that is more, I think the lack of judgment in when people are in those like scarcity mindsets is the best way of people feeling in which they can get out of that spot.
Yeah, I think it's just being able to name it and tame it, which is so important, but also to be able to ask for resources and say, if we had more resources, we could bring ourselves into Brain 3.0,
Yep.
right? And there are benefits for having all of these communities living in Brain 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think eventually philanthropists and government leaders will realize that a lot of the problems we have is that we don't provide people with enough to be in Brain 3.0. And when they live in Brain 1.0 and 2.0, people escape with drugs. And then that creates a market for drug dealers, right? A lot of these problems are solved if we actually bring more people into Brain 3.0.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really appreciate you sharing this because I think there's so, me personally and many people in my life I think could really benefit from this. And you know, I'm really happy that you are pushing this initiative in Philly specifically, because I can see all of the things in which you're mentioning that can be worked on and can be improved, and there's so many people that could benefit from understanding this. So thank you so much for sharing this, and I hope that we have a lot of Philly nonprofits that have participated in this podcast that can also watch. So I hope that, you know, maybe this can enforce some kind of collaboration too in the community. And yeah, thank you again so much for sharing.
Yeah, my pleasure. And we have programs like virtual workshops on our calendar throughout the year. We have what we call equity scholarships and change maker scholarships for people who are doing good. And sometimes they can join for as little as $5, right? And so we welcome more and more nonprofits to engage, to take advantage of these scholarships, that we're even willing to provide free tickets if they're willing to show up, right?
Yeah.
We need them to show up.
Uh-huh.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching or listening. I hope that you're able to check this out in our description. And so you can also, you know, see if this will, you know, benefit you in the ways that which we talked about. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much and have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.